All right, welcome to the Perfect Storm webinar. Super excited to be able to come to you digitally on Zoom with this and have this recorded not only in our app here at the office, but available for you to share with family and friends and really any other practitioners and people in our field that want to learn more about the neurology behind neurosensory struggles with kids. So if you have other people that you're working with, other holistic practitioners that really want more resources for kids and families that are dealing with this struggle, absolutely share with them this webinar. We are so excited to bring it to you live tonight. And right away on this opening slide, I've got three words right on here: hope, answers, and help. And those are the three things that I want to make sure that you leave this webinar with. There's going to be a lot of stories. We have a lot of testimonials that we share in this workshop because nothing brings to light the work that we do more than actually seeing the kids and the smiles on their faces when their lives start to change. And really the words written by their parents when we really get to dig into what's happening when we start to turn the nervous system back on to accurately perceiving the world around them. And then answers. We're going to dive deep into the science behind neurology and subluxation. What's really happening in the brains of these kids and what can we do about it? And the last thing, help. If you are watching this webinar, I promise you that there is an amazing opportunity at the end here for you to come into our office and find out if the care that we provide and what we do specifically in our office can be of service to you and your family. So I want to make sure that you get that opportunity. So let's just jump right in. Again, my name is Dr. Jeremy Fowle. I'll introduce myself a little more here in a second. I'm going to jump right into some amazing stories because this is why I'm on here at 8 o'clock at night. This is why we're connecting with you guys, because there's nothing more important than the kids in these stories. And so I start off with this little girl, Brooklyn, on the bottom of your screen. She's sitting there with Dr. Brenna in both of those pictures. And her mom, Jackie, writes, "We're so grateful to our EWC family. Brooklyn is making such amazing strides every single day. She's counting, she's saying her ABCs. For the first time in her 3.5 years, I got to hear 'I love you.' I can't say enough amazing things about this team, and we couldn't imagine our lives without them." We are going to dive deep into Brooklyn's story at the end of the workshop tonight, but just a little background: diagnosed with autism, nonverbal. When she started care in her office, she needed braces on her legs to walk. There were so many challenges that she was going through. And you see right there that within just a few months, amazing things start to change. Now, I want to highlight this little guy, Zion, in the Roar shirt. Listen to this. After only 2 weeks of specific chiropractic adjustments, Zion started to change. He started saying words again and singing along to songs when they were on in the background. The coolest thing about this little dude, Zion, he was nonverbal when he started care. And it was so soon, only a matter of weeks, that we started to hear him singing along to songs in the background. I love this story because it highlights the fact that these kids are there, right? Their minds are there and they're aware of everything that's happening around them. There's just a disconnect within their nervous system that doesn't allow them to process information and coordinate the response effectively. And that is exactly what we're going to dive into tonight. This says 3 months into care, his mom reports that he's graduated to a new classroom earlier than ever expected. He was not potty trained. He wasn't able to use the bathroom by himself, which oftentimes prevent kids from moving up into more advanced classrooms in their daycare centers. And within just a matter of a few months, he was potty trained and seeing amazing changes. This little guy, Will, on the bottom, he was dealing with a condition called PANDAS. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a pediatric autoimmune and neurosensory disorder associated with strep. Essentially, anytime they're affected by strep bacteria, they come exposed to it, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It starts to affect their brain in a way that most people don't. It's an inflammatory condition, and they're all so very different. So listen to this. Since starting care at EWC, Will's immune system is responding better. He's only been with one autoimmune flare since he's been getting ingested, and the flare only lasted a few days instead of a week or two. His classmates have been passing around colds all winter, and Will only got a small cold that lasted for less than 48 hours. His before-school anxiety is diminishing. He's able to get on the bus without tears. He's handling transitions during his day much better and regulating his emotions too. He seems to have more patience, understanding, and awareness of others, Will is able to play and interact with kids his own age with more ease. He's also sleeping better and wakes up in a better mood. We are never leaving EWC. We are so excited by the progress Will has made thus far. And at the end of each adjustment, he walks into our house with a huge smile and tells me he had so much fun and feels better. In our office, as you can see in these pictures, we specialize in making kids feel comfortable. This isn't your normal chiropractor's office with twisting and cracking and popping and where sometimes the adjustments are painful. It is made with so much ease and it's so gentle and kids just love it. Look at the smiles on these kids' faces. And that's what we want for every kiddo that comes into our space. So that's me with the big beard on the side. And I want to highlight this incredible team right here. We have a team of 5 chiropractors. We have a team of 5 CAs in our practice. And it is amazing what a team can do when we're all on the same page and we're there with just this mentality to serve. And so you'll see myself, Dr. Kevin, Dr. Allison, Dr. Brenna, and Justice. And then we've got Maria, Meredith, Jake, Madeline, and Kristen. So it's an incredible team of chiropractic advocates that are here to help serve you and chiropractors that are here to do everything we can. And that allows me to be on calls like this and be out speaking and sharing my passion, which is our vision for our practice of reaching one more mom. That's our mission, is to reach more moms. So every time we are in the community, we're talking to people about chiropractic. We're talking about the ability of our bodies to heal and be healthy, because we are so on purpose to help kids and families heal and just be healthier. I want to start with a quick little video for you to watch, and I'm hoping this should dial right in.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
Moral of the story there, it's easy to miss something you aren't looking for, right? So when we talk about the perfect storm tonight, we talk about what is this recipe of ingredients that leads to neurosensory struggles with kids and adults, really. It isn't any singular thing. And everything we talk about tonight isn't something that no one's ever heard of before. It's simply what we call the 30,000-foot view. So it's like we take a big step back and we look differently. And the reason why we look differently is because for over a decade now, we've sat knee to knee. And when I say we, I don't just mean me and my team here in my practice, but if you look at the bottom corner, we are part of a group called the Pediatric Experience. There's over 800 pediatric chiropractors worldwide. Really, it's international, mostly US. There's some in Canada, and really we're starting to grow and grow, but we're a part of a group that all studies together. We all train together, and we all starting to understand the significance of what this storm really is, because it starts way sooner than we're typically led on to believe. And the reason we know that is because we've sat down, what we said, 800 chiropractors, when we put our brains together and we kind of go back to the beginning, we go, what do we keep hearing over and over and over again? What are the ingredients that we're hearing as you sit and you listen to a mom's story? When did their child start to struggle? What are the common things that we're seeing as we go back in their history? And so that's what I want to go back to, because when we talk about the perfect storm, it actually starts right here. It starts with fertility and pregnancy stress. And so much of what we're going to talk about tonight is neurology and the nervous system. And when you're working to get pregnant, and when you're pregnant, a mom shares a nervous system with a developing baby. And so even before a woman gets pregnant, there is stress in her body if they're dealing with fertility issues, right? That's an incredibly stressful thing. And so if a woman gets pregnant while her nervous system is really stuck in a fight or flight state, chances are that from the very beginning of that conception, that embryo is growing in a fight or flight state, and you're starting to hardwire stress into that developing baby. We make this joke all the time, but it's not that funny. What's the first thing that gets given to just about every mom at her first baby shower? It's a book, and it's called What to Expect When You're Expecting. Really, it's like a Stephen King novel of everything that can go wrong from the day you find out you're pregnant at every step of the way. And so we're starting to program stress. We're starting to program fear. We're starting to program this idea that you need to go in and get checked. You need to go in and have more tests. You need to go in and make sure everything's okay. And obviously, this isn't to rule out red flags or ignore big challenges. But when we start to look back and go, why is there so many kids being born into these next steps of the perfect storm? It's because moms are more stressed than ever when they're getting pregnant. They're more stressed than ever when they are pregnant, and that leads to something that comes next, which is medical intervention at labor and delivery. This is an absolute, moonwalking bear when we're talking about what we just saw in that video, and we're going to go deep into a lot of this stuff as we go. But when I say medical interventions, it can be anything from your emergency C-section, and then we start to backtrack and go, was there vacuum used? Was there forceps used? Was there additional stress on the baby's head and neck as they're coming out? Shoulder dystocia? Did the head get stuck? Did they need to be induced, right? Were there other medical interventions? Was there an epidural? Was there a failed epidural? Was there an issue with the medication that mom was given? So many medical interventions take place. And one thing I can promise you that we've seen over and over and over again is that one intervention begets and leads to another intervention and makes the next intervention easier and the next intervention easier for the medical practitioners to actually push on you, but also it makes it harder for the mom to actually go through the natural labor and delivery process. Every intervention creates more stress within the woman's body. Every intervention creates the more likelihood of the necessary next intervention. So that is absolutely huge. Then what happens next? So baby comes out. What do we see first? The first signs of perfect storm stress within a baby is that colicky, constipation, reflux, right? The stressed baby, colic, constipation, reflux are the biggest things that we see right away when they come out. Why? Because those are the first systems that have to develop in a baby. From there, what do we see? Where do they grow? They grow into a challenging toddler, constantly sick. From there, what do we have? We grow into the next phase, which is that sensory, even maybe spectrum, but stuck child. That's where we start to see the behavior challenges, the energy struggles that kids have, this bouncing off the walls. They can't follow instructions. From there, where do we go? Exhausted, angry, anxious, depressed teenagers. The perfect storm doesn't stop in childhood. It goes right into those teenage years. And guess what? It doesn't stop there either. We're seeing more and more and more burnt out, stressed out, anxious, and ADHD adults. More and more often, we're having the parents of perfect storm kids on our phone calls. We're sitting knee to knee in our office going, I was a perfect storm kid. We go, well, no wonder that is starting to trickle down. So know that every step of the way matters. And we hear this all too often when kids in any one of these phases, they go into the pediatrician and the pediatrician says, it's no big deal. They're colicky. It's no big deal. They'll grow out of it. Constantly sick. They're constantly dealing with ear infections. That's just because their tubes are at a different angle. As soon as they hit a growth spurt, they'll grow out of it. Oh, they're constantly dealing with, you name it, said thing, this behavioral thing, that's just boys being boys. They'll grow out of it. They don't grow out of it. Let me say that again. They don't grow out of it. These kids simply grow into the next challenge. We see it over and over again. This same challenge that they're dealing with right now, it might not be the same thing that they're dealing with in 6 months to a year from now, but their bodies adapt to the stress that they're under and they simply grow into the next challenge. So oftentimes we're uncovering layer upon layer of perfect storm stress that these kids have been through as we're getting back to the root causing, back to that root foundational pattern that their nervous system gets stuck in. So what are we really talking about tonight? We're talking about every step of the way. If you think about the gas pedal on your car, every step of the way, you're adding a little bit more gas into that engine. You're revving that engine a little bit more onto that stress scale, whether it's a physical trauma, whether it's toxins that their body's dealing with, whether it's a mental, emotional stress that they're dealing with. It's all stress that gets stuck on in their nervous system. And when the stress gets stuck on in the nervous system, that's what we call a sympathetic dominant state. Let me say it again, sympathetic dominance. That's your body's fight or flight response. When you get stuck in a fight or flight response, that's where all of these named conditions here, these diagnoses thrive. Medical diagnoses thrive in a nervous system and a body that's stuck in a sympathetic dominant state. Why? Because all healing, growth, and development happens in a parasympathetic state, which is your body's rest and digest, which is like the brake pedal. So we are going to dig in to this even further as we go tonight. So what's really at the root of all this? It's your nervous system. And what's the function of your nervous system? Like we can go really deep into neurology here, or we can just break it down and say, let's make it really simple. The function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment. So take on information from the environment, from all of your senses, and coordinate the behavior of all of your other cells. So what does that mean? Take in the input that's happening around you and to you, and create the proper behavior in response to it. That's what our nervous system does. It's absorbing information and responding appropriately all day long. So when we are stuck in that stressed state, one of those two things is going haywire. We're not perceiving information accurately, and we're not coordinating the behavior of our bodies accurately because we're stuck in a fight or flight state, which throws everything off. So let's dive into this thing called subluxation. Subluxation is what alters the perception of what's coming into our brain. So think if the information is coming into our brain and we have a subluxation somewhere along your spinal cord, along that information highway, it's like a traffic jam that's going to have misperception in your brain, which is ultimately going to lead to altered function. So if we have bad input, we're going to have bad output. Altered perception coming in is altered function going out. Now, I want you to keep in mind those steps that we just went through on our last slide, all of those different struggles that kids go through, from labor and delivery to colic stress to digestive stress to sick, challenged toddlers to stuck kids. And we're going to go right back to the neurodevelopment of the brain. Right? Brains are built from the bottom up and the back forward. Let me turn here. From the bottom up and the back forward. Embryologically, that's the order with which our brains become developed. And so what comes first at the bottom down here is our body's motor control. Motor control is absolutely essential when babies are born for three things. Actually, two things, let's say eating and pooping. Right? A baby's three things they need to be able to do to be healthier: eat, sleep, and poop, right? Sleep doesn't have anything to do with motor yet. We're going to get to that. But they need to be able to eat. They need to coordinate the movement of their head and neck. They need to coordinate the movement of their jaw, their lips, and their tongue so that they can what? Eat. It's simple as that. Motor function in an infant means they're able to eat and sustain life. It becomes that simple. Can they eat? So some of the earliest signs that we see of babies that are subluxated and dealing with motor issues is they can't turn their head well enough to nurse on one side, or they're better on one side than the other. They can't coordinate a latch. They can't nurse effectively. So many things, like torticollis is one of the named things, a diagnosis that we see a lot of babies that come into, like, oh, they have torticollis. They just need to stretch that muscle. Wrong. They have torticollis. We need to remove the interference pattern in their upper neck so that their body can turn that muscle back on effectively. So motor control is number one. What comes next? Gut. As soon as they're able to actually eat, they're able to actually control their motor system, and then they have the motor system that actually moves food down through their body, then their gut actually has to start to work. You'll notice that babies who are exclusively breastfed, exclusively nursed, getting the absolute best food that they possibly can, the best nourishment that's most easily assimilated and broken down in their gut, tend to do better. As soon as you start to introduce things like formula or milk or dairy or other things that their body's not quite ready to break down, their gut isn't quite as developed yet, you're going to start to see more challenges. Or if we're already dealing with a motor challenge and their gut hasn't effectively gotten to the point where it can work and peristalsis can actually move the food through and their gut's breaking down food effectively, what are we going to have? reflux. And if their body isn't digesting food and assimilating it properly, what are we going to have? Constipation. So what are we thinking? If they can't use their motor function in order to eat properly, and they can't have a gut function in order to digest food properly, move food through and eliminate properly, we're going to have some more significant challenges. So what comes after that? We see immune system challenges, because that's the next thing that needs to develop. Immune system challenges come next with chronic congestion, always runny nose, chronic coughs, right? The goopy eyes, the chronic ear infections, like all these things that just don't seem to go away. Go back up the line. Chances are there was reflux. Chances are there was constipation. Chances are there was early motor issues that went undiagnosed, and now we're dealing with an immune challenge. Go from there. What comes next? Speech comes next. It's all in neurodevelopmental order. Speech comes next. We see social issues, we see behavioral issues, and then we see emotional issues. And you can go ahead and just put the order of diagnosis that we see most commonly in that order in that age group. So brains are built from the bottom up, from the back forward, and they have to have proper motor function of their upper neck, where their head sits on their upper neck, their jaw, their tongue, and all of this oral stuff first before everything else starts to work. Let's get into, excuse me, a quick discussion on the developing child that came in from Harvard. What is Harvard telling us in this slide? It says the interaction of genes and experiences actually shape your developing brain. So what does that mean? It means that although your genes are really the blueprint, or like the archetype for your brain circuits, the only way that they truly become developed is by reinforcing and repeated use. So if these kids aren't doing something properly, the neural connections aren't happening appropriately. So nurture is incredibly important, but the ability to utilize and reinforce that circuitry is massively important. So if they don't have the right motor control right away and they start moving their body with an abnormal pattern, it's not growing and connecting the dots, connecting the neural synapses in their brain the way it's supposed to. And so it's going to start to have challenges down the road. Cognitive, emotional, and social capacities are inextricably intertwined throughout the life course. So what does that mean? You're constantly growing and developing these areas of your brain throughout life. And toxic stress weakens the architecture of the developing brain, which leads to lifelong problems in learning, behavior, and physical and mental health. I love that leading into this next slide, because I want you to see this sign right here that says persistent stress changes the brain architecture. So the one on the bottom, or I'll start with the one on the top, that has all of those different synapses, all of those different branches coming off of that nucleus of that brain cell. Every one of those little branches is connecting to another area of the brain, another set of synapses, another set of cells that's connecting and making things easier for growth and development. When we're stuck in a sympathetic stress, when we're stuck in fight or flight, our body goes into this shutdown mode where we only care about survival. It doesn't care about growth and development. Our body's not putting resources into growth and development when it's stuck in fight or flight, because fight or flight means survival mode. And so it saves its resources for survival. And you'll see what happens right there to the developing architecture of the brain. It becomes very limited. You actually grow with damaged neurons, with fewer connections. And then we wonder why we're missing these growth and developmental milestones, why they're not walking on time, why they're clumsy, why they're not as coordinated, why they're not putting their speech together. It's because toxic stress early on, even if it's hidden and you don't really know it's there, changes the developmental patterns of the brain. And then on this other graph over here, you'll see which pathways happen soonest. It's those sensory pathways, vision and hearing, and then it goes into language, and then it goes into higher cognitive function. So really what that tells us is the sooner you get your child checked for subluxation, the sooner you get your child checked for neurological connection and proper motor movement and all of the things we're talking about, the better, because you don't want to miss any milestone or any neurodevelopmental connectivity if we don't have to. So what is the real algorithm we're talking about here? It's talking about how much stress have they been under and when did it occur? The 3 T's that we talk about: toxins, traumas, and thoughts. Physical stress could be birth trauma. It could be slipping and falling off your bike. It could be falling down the stairs. It could be, some type of tumble off of a chair or countertop or changing table as a little one. Chemical stress, you name it, cleaning supplies, pesticides, vaccines, medications, all of these things that have their purpose at times are massively stressful to a nervous system that's stuck in fight or flight, right? So we're talking about how much and when does it occur to when we're actually dealing with, like, what does it take to come out of it? So timing of when these stressors happen and then how often and how much are they dealing with it is really to look at how much care do they need and for how long in order to get out of the storm that they're in. This is a definition of the neurospinal system put out by Dr. Tony Ebel, who's my mentor in this work. He's the creator of the Perfect Storm work, and I've been working with him for over a decade. It says the spine serves as far more than a bunch of ligaments and bones. It's a living, breathing, neurological communication superhighway. It's vitally important for brain to body and back again, communication, coordination, and control of every other tissue, cell, and system of a biological and physiological system. What does that tell us? It tells us that the information going to and from your brain controls and coordinates every other system of your body. It controls and coordinates your immune system. It controls and coordinates your digestive system, your endocrine system, your respiratory system, your reproductive system. You name it, it is controlled and coordinated by your brain and spinal cord. So when we talk about chiropractic and why we typically are using the areas along the spine as a conduit to make changes, it's because that's our direct access point to your central nervous system. So again, this big word, subluxation, what does it mean? It means the stress gets stuck on in your nervous system. It means the sympathetic stress, that fight or flight response, gets stuck on within your nervous system. And when it's stuck on, you can't just turn it off, because you can't just turn off survival mode. You have to have it calmed from within. So let's dive into the next section, which is really nerd time for me, because now we get to dig into what really is subluxation and what happens neurologically when we're dealing with it. So the first D, we're going to go through 5 Ds tonight, is what we call dyskinesia, which is really the abnormal movement, right? We talked right away about motor systems developing first, motor systems being the groundwork of connective synaptic activity with growth and development within the brain. Well, misalignment and fixation, or dyskinesia, abnormal movement patterns, is actually what sets in right away and starts to create challenges for the nervous system. All right. Hang with me on this. It's going to be a really graphic video, but this is the moonwalking bear that we're talking about from that first slide, right? What are we not looking for? This is a video of an actual C-section. There's a vacuum assist. And what I really want you to pay attention to here is the amount of strain and stress that happens on this delicate structure, this upper neck of this baby. And then we'll talk about it here in a minute.
Getting irritated. Oh, there you go, fella.
Come on, buddy.
All right. Ears of a girl. Ears of a girl. Make you cute for the camera.
Oh, man. Keep coming back.
There you go.
Wow. I never feel like I'm fully prepared to see it, and I've seen this hundreds and hundreds of times, and I'm going to move it right off of that slide to this one next, because what you will notice is the last one had that vacuum assist. It was an incredible amount of strain pulling against mom's body, and the vacuum added more to it. This one, there's no vacuum on it. These hands look gentle, but even with gentle hands, you can see the distractive force. You can see the pulling tissue on the neck of this baby, and at no point in our creation was a baby's head designed to be used as the focal point of distraction to be removed from a mother. And I know that this can be necessary at times. We personally, my wife, had a cesarean with our first. So there can be life-saving. The most important thing when we talk about whether or not you need a cesarean is, are they getting their upper neck checked for subluxation as soon as possible afterwards? Because if you do, you are going to be able to eliminate so many challenges down the road. You're going to be able to prevent these challenges from happening because you're reconnecting the dots. You're reconnecting the ability for proper movement patterns and synaptic connectivity within the brain simply by ensuring that there's no subluxation pattern instilled in the upper neck right from birth. Now, like I said, cesarean rates or C-sections can absolutely be life-saving. When we talk about the World Health Organization, which is typically kind of the, on the forefront of what is necessary worldwide, even they say that up to 10% of births could be necessary to have a C-section. Well, this is the trajectories from 1970 to 2012 right here in the United States. Back in the 70s, 6%. 2012, we're now sitting at 33%. And that was even now 12 years ago, or 2024, right here in the Twin Cities metro, it's not uncommon to be up closer to 40%. 35 is probably the average, but it really depends on what hospitals you go to. And you can get that information just right on Google. You can go cesarean rates at this hospital or this area, and you can get the information, and you'll see that it's astronomically higher than it should be. And I know 100% for a fact that this has a big impact on neurodevelopmental challenges and illnesses and reasons that kids and our health of our kids is as low as it is. I mean, United States, we have more money spent on healthcare than any country in the world. And we're ranked like something like less than 50th in healthcare. Right? We have the highest obesity rates in kids. We have the highest rates of chronic disease. Chronic disease in kids in the United States is higher than just about anywhere else in the world. How can that be if we have the best medical system on the planet? If we spend the most money on healthcare? It's because we're not looking at it the right way, right? We're not looking at how are we growing the healthiest kids possible. We're saying our current healthcare system is, do we have the best drugs possible? Do we have the best medications to treat disease? Not, do we have the healthiest kids? Do we have the best nutrition? Do we have the best system for raising kids? We have to start to look at things very, very differently. Somatic dysfunction is another word for what we call subluxation, right? That imbalance in movement patterns. Somatic dysfunction means dysfunctional movement. So this was a study done by an osteopathic journal. So not even chiropractic. And what it tells you is that in 99 out of 100 infants that were released from the hospital as healthy newborns, they found an incidence of somatic dysfunction, which means 99 out of 100 healthy released newborns had a pattern of subluxation in their upper neck, what they called kinematic interstitial suboccipital sprain, or KISS syndrome. So basically an injury to the upper neck at birth that could be shown on examination, but they're deemed to be healthy babies. Why? Because no one's looking for this stuff. Nobody's looking for subluxation in these infants when they're born. They're just checking the boxes saying it's a healthy baby, and they send them out. All the while, they kind of just get passed off to the next practitioner. So they go from the hospital and their person there to your family pediatrician. And then if there's something there, then they go to a special, and people aren't talking to each other, right? So often, we have parents that say, we went to this person for this, and then this person put us on this, and then this person told us to do this. And they don't actually have a hub of someone that's saying, well, what's really going on with their nervous system? How is this affecting them here? How is this affecting them here? And really going, is this overall the best interest of this kiddo? Everyone's just kind of doing their own thing. And just so you guys know, all of the stuff that we're talking about is referenced right here. We have a ton more resources if you want. Shoot us an email, shoot us a DM on our socials. If you're in our app, shoot us a message on the app, and we'll get you a copy of our resources if you want, because there's so much research out there on exactly what we were talking about. Look at this: perinatal factors in the development of autism, perinatal and neonatal risk factors for autism, comprehensive meta-analysis, planned C-section delivery at term, and adverse outcomes in childhood health. This stuff has been studied. This is why I get so passionate and so frustrated, because these studies are there, and the medical system itself knows what challenges are coming from the procedures that they're doing, and no one's taking it the next step. No one's taking it the next step to go, why is this happening, when it's happening, and what can we be doing about it way before it becomes such a challenge? So what comes after dyskinesia? Dyskinesia, remember, abnormal movement. We get disafferentation, which is abnormal neurological input. So when we have abnormal movement, it changes the input into your brain. It changes the sensory input that's going into your brain. So another really cool video that I want to share with you, this was actually put out by an OT group, Occupational Therapy, and they do such a great job of making this really simple. So take a look at this, and then we'll talk some more.
Some kids are really bouncy and can't sit still. Some kids aren't very coordinated. Some see food as a pile of toxic goo that hurts their mouth and jangles their taste buds. School might be a mysterious place where things don't make much sense. If this sounds like you, you may have sensory processing disorder, and we're going to explain it here. Your body has 7 senses: vision in your eyes, hearing in your ears, touch in your skin, taste in your mouth, and smell in your nose. And you have 2 movement senses: your muscles and your sense of balance. In sensory processing disorder, these senses don't communicate right with your brain. Think of the nerves connecting your brain and senses as a set of roads. Those roads should be smooth superhighways so that the senses and brain can communicate fast. If you have sensory processing disorder, then some of your roads are bumpy and rough. You can also think of the senses as having a broken volume control. If the volume is too high, you will feel your senses too strongly. If the volume is too low, you won't feel sensation at all. In fact, you'll want more. Some kids overcome these problems as they grow older. Others need help. Help is usually occupational therapy, and it's fun. Occupational therapy helps build up the connections between your senses and your brain. The more you do, the stronger and smoother they get, kind of like paving those roads. After a while, you'll learn to slow down and sit still, to pay attention.
One thing you should have noticed right there is as they said, ta-da, and all the roads became smooth. They all come up and cross at one place, right here in the upper neck, right? All sensory information has to pass through right here. And a lot of the input and the information coming into our brain actually comes up and crosses from one side of the spinal cord to the other as it goes up into your brain. So there's so much happening right here. And if we go back to that C-section delivery video, if we go back to what we're talking about, induction and heads getting stuck and so many challenges with labor and delivery and birth intervention, it's all focused on the subluxation patterns that start right here. Over and over again, we get kids that have been in PT and they've been in OT and they've been in speech and they've been in feeding therapy and they've been in so many other things. They've thrown the kitchen sink at these kids because nothing seems to be working, or even just getting them up past a kind of a certain point of a plateau. And we find that the reason they're plateaued is there's only so much you can get done when there's a subluxation roadblock traffic jam of the neurological signals right at this level of their brainstem, right? If their nervous system is stuck and can't process information properly, there's only so much that they're going to get through in those sessions or in those therapies. So when we start getting them adjusted, we start removing those subluxation patterns in their nervous system, all these other therapies improve. All these other therapies become that much more effective and impactful. We love PT, we love OT, we love speech. Why? Because we don't do any of that in our office, and these kids need it. But the first thing they need is a properly functioning subluxation-free nervous system so their body can process all the input from those other therapies. So as we talk about the input into the brain, I want to share with you 2 big parts of the sensory system, which is proprioception, which is the perception of movement, right? So I think proprioception is the perception of movement. It's calming information going into your brain. A significant percentage of the movement stimulation that goes to your brain, which is a vital nutrient for a developing brain, is proper movement information coming in. A huge percentage of that comes from the spine, and especially the upper neck. I think 66% of all proprioceptive information in the body comes from the spine and pelvis, and something like 33%, right around there, comes from just the top 3 bones in your neck. Why? Because your brain, your nervous system, the nervous system of these babies is hyper aware of what's happening right here, because that's where the brainstem sits. So our body has built in all of these movement sensors right here to know exactly what's happening. And so when it's subluxated, it changes from proprioception to nociception. So when things don't move properly, when it gets stuck and fixated and subluxated, nociception sets in, which is the perception of stress. It's the sensory nervous system's response to certain harmful or potentially harmful stimulus, which can be mechanical, chemical, or thermal. Any of those things can change our body's nociceptive input. And we have what we call a gate theory, meaning if something is not working properly within our neurospinal system, it decreases the proprioception or movement sense that's coming in because it's not working right, right? It's that motor challenge right away. And what it does is it opens the gate to let excessive nociception in instead. What does that mean? It means if you're not getting kind of this calming Kenny G, smooth jazz in the background that you can kind of work through and it's calming throughout life, if we take that away, because we're subluxated, it's blocking the good messaging, the proprioceptive messaging going into your brain. It opens the door for screamo death metal, right? Overwhelmingly loud neurological noise coming into the brain. So what does that mean? It means it's incredibly hard to focus. It's incredibly hard to communicate. It's incredibly hard to make the right connections neurodevelopmentally when all of that noise is happening in the brain and the brain just wants to shut it down. So what happens to these kids is they get overwhelmed. They get overwhelmed with all of the different scenarios that they're in, whether they're out in public and there's noise, whether there's too much sensory information, tactile stuff, certain clothes they can't have, tags on their clothes, different tastes, different textures in their mouth. It's all just incredibly overwhelming because it's nociceptive input that's being allowed into the brain instead of good proprioceptive calming input. We're going to nerd out here for a minute, and we're going to dive into some of the actual structures of the brain. So I want to talk about the amygdala, right? The amygdala is the emotional seat of the brain. And when there's disafferentation or abnormal input coming into the amygdala that's actually in control of survival, it's just math again, right? If everything coming into the brain is fight or flight, stress, what happens is it starts to signal more stress and the nerves start to hardwire and become sensitized to that information. You think about muscle memory and your body creating circuitry to learn an instrument or whatever it is that your body does to make things easier for you throughout life as you learn new skills. It's just connecting the dots in your brain, right? It's connecting one synapse with another synapse to make things happen faster. Your brain does the same thing with stress. If everything coming in early and often is stress, it learns to fire stress faster, which means it learns to fire a sympathetic response faster. It learns to trigger fight or flight faster. So these kids are actually programming their brain to have meltdowns faster. Think about that. They're actually programming their brain to have more emotional dysregulation and trigger that fight or flight stress response faster, to trigger that meltdown faster, to trigger that running away system faster, that fear mechanism faster, that anxious mechanism faster. If we take in 11 million bits of information per second in our brain, we want as few of those to be related to stress and fight or flight as possible. Hyperactivity of the amygdala is actually associated with fear and anxiety disorders because of what we just said. If all it's getting is fear and anxiety, it starts to learn to trigger fear and anxiety faster and faster and faster. It's a scary thought for these kids. So what about what comes next? Next, we're going to talk about the hippocampus. It's actually really important. It's a part of your brain that's important for converting short-term memories into long-term memories, which is a core function of learning, right? You experience something once, it goes into your short-term memory. And then if it's there long enough, we reinforce those circuits, it's going into long-term memory. It plays a huge role in spatial memory and situational awareness in order to properly navigate your environment, which means not acting inappropriately when you've been through a situation before, right? Why is my kid always the one that's blurting things out, yelling inappropriately, laughing at things that aren't funny, having all of these misdirected responses to situations? It's because their brain isn't learning the appropriate response when it was there the first time. Your brain isn't learning what's the appropriate way to handle situations. So this area works in concert with your amygdala to consolidate your emotions and long-term memories, which is a process critical for evaluating information, right? Perception and coordination, processing information in order to appropriately respond to situations. Last little area of the brain we're going to talk about is your prefrontal cortex. What's really cool is your prefrontal cortex is it sits way up here, and all this stuff comes through like relay stations in your brain before it gets up here. It's the last thing to be developed. For girls, it's usually, your late teens, early 20s. For guys, I mean, I'm probably still developing my prefrontal cortex. But what happens is input to your cerebellum, which is again movement stuff, it dictates where information goes into the brain. So improved cerebellar function, which means improved movement patterns, and vestibular, which is balance issues, fine and gross motor control, and better autonomic regulation, all happens when the movement patterns are better. Changes to your cerebellum and function there is related to improved prefrontal cortex function, since the cerebellum filters and feeds forward information to the appropriate areas of your prefrontal cortex. What does that mean? It means social emotional struggles can start with a lack of proper movement patterns within the body. All right, next D, dysautonomia. So far we've got dyskinesia, disafferentation, which means abnormal motor, things that get stuck and not moving properly, abnormal input into the brain, and now we're getting abnormal output. Autonomic nervous system is the output part of your nervous system that controls all the auxiliary organ systems that you don't have to think about. And if you don't take anything away from this workshop, this is the singular most important quote that I have on here, is that you cannot be in growth and protection at the same time, which means these kids cannot be stuck in a stressed fight or flight dominant state and also be in a state where they can properly be in growth and development. It can't happen. So if these kids are stuck early and often, if they're colicky, if they're dealing with immune challenges, if they're dealing with gut issues, if they're dealing with, step, they're not in growth mode. They're not in neurodevelopment mode. They're in protection mode, and things will lag behind and they will have struggles. Again, if everything coming in early and often is stress on the gas pedal, we're going to be stuck in sympathetics. We're going to be stuck in a nervous system that's in fight or flight, and we will not have access to the rest, digest, growth, and development that we need. Quick little bit on the vagus nerve. If you want to learn to hack your nervous system, this is where you need to go, because the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve 10. It's called the wandering nerve, is what vagus stands for. And it leaves here and it goes down to all of these different areas of the body: thyroid, heart, lungs, digestion, liver, pancreas, spleen, large colon, small intestine. All of it is related to the vagus nerve. It's also related to inflammatory conditions. It's related to heart and respiratory rhythms. It's related to social emotional connection. It is related to so many things, and it comes from right here. And they're doing some really cool research on it that's now actually showing that parasympathetic functions in children with sensory processing disorders are diminished. So sensory modulation disorders is what they have. SMD is related to increased tone and activity within the vagus nerve. That's awesome. It's awesome because that's what we influence as neurological focused chiropractors. And everybody on here has probably heard of the gut-brain connection, right? It's this new big buzzword in health and wellness and biohacking and all of that, is we have to heal the microbiome, we have to heal the gut. But let's go back to what we talked about earlier. What starts first? Does the nervous system start first, or does the gut start first? Our nervous system starts first. So really it should be the other way around. It should be the brain-gut connection long before the gut-brain connection. Then they're actually studying it to prove this, that right now they're able to put vagal nerve electrical stimulators, implants on the vagus nerve. And what they're finding is that when they stimulate the vagus nerve with electrical stimulation, it potently reduces intestinal inflammation. So inflammatory gut issues go away when they stimulate the vagus nerve. That's incredible. Why? Because it tells us that if we can simply calm the vagal tone, if we can calm the nervous system, we should have a huge response in healing of the gut. And that's exactly what we see here in our office. We see kids with food sensitivities that when they start getting adjusted, when they start changing the input into their brain, they start changing the neurological function of their bodies, their food sensitivities go away. We see allergies go away. We see so many cool things happening within the bodies and all these systems, the gut, the immune system, all of that, when they start getting adjusted and we start calming the nervous system, because the nervous system comes first. And that controls and coordinates every other system in the body. which is why we see so many kids who've been what? They've been on probiotics, they've been on prebiotics, they've been on anti-inflammatory diet, FODMAP, you name it, they've been on it, and they've had limited results. Maybe it took away a couple of their symptoms. Maybe it took away, one or two things over here, or it reduced some of their responses. But when they start getting adjusted, they start balancing the nervous system, all that other stuff starts to change rapidly. Another D, fourth D, developmental diaskesis. What does this mean? It means that there's critical periods of development with cerebellar dysfunction may disrupt the maturation of distant neocortical circuits. What does that mean? When your cerebellum is growing, if we're subluxated and it starts to change the input in there, it's going to actually change different areas of your brain because the right information isn't moving forward. See, traditionally, the cerebellum has been studied in relation to just motor movement and coordination in adults. But recent studies are strongly suggesting that it also influences childhood cognition, meaning these movement patterns and this ability to move freely and have proper neurological control of the upper neck right away is pivotal for distant development within the brain. So diaskesis is defined, it's a sudden loss of a function in a portion of the brain connected to a distant but damaged brain area, which means if something's not working right here, it'll have a sudden loss of function in a portion of the brain way on the other side that isn't actually damaged. It just stops growing effectively and stops connecting effectively because of what's happening somewhere else. So we go here. If there's damage, it creates disconnection, which creates disruption within the nervous system and the connectivity, which creates a distortion at a very distant part of the brain. So it's so cool when we talk about how can we start to affect behavioral disorders in kids. It's we start to change the input patterns moving into the cerebellum. How cool is that? Next D, dyskinesis. So let's review. Dyskinesia, disafferentation, dysautonomia, developmental diaskesis, and now dyskinesis. So we get through all of this input that's abnormal into the brain. We get output that's abnormal autonomically. Now we get output that's wrong motor system wise. Dyskinesis is the reversible pathophysiological state composed of neurophysiological reactions to various agents and the repercussions of these reactions through the organism. What does this mean? It means abnormal output of energy, movement patterns, inability to control their bodies. Think tics, seizures, brain activity that can't be controlled as it's leaving the body. The coolest thing about dyskinesis, we can measure it. We can measure the abnormal output of the nervous system. When we look at a neurological scan, an EMG scan, which is electromyography, which is measuring energy within the muscle systems along the spine, we know that there's a normal output of energy that we want to measure. On the scans in our office, you'll see this progress from left to right on your screen. We want the bars to be all white. White means a normal range of muscle energy firing. Green is mild, blue is moderate, red is significant increase in muscle energy. This was a kiddo that came in, actually mom sat through one of our live workshops. And when he came into the office, there was nothing on a shelf that he wouldn't pick up and throw or knock down or run into. He was a bull in a china shop. He could not control his body. Couldn't control his body in school. There was no settings that he was not being disruptive in, physically, noise, I mean, you name it, his output. We're talking ADHD behaviors, just raging bull behaviors. He can't control it. Well, no wonder. You look at this graph, he has 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 bars on that entire system are firing within a normal range. Everything else is abnormal. Everything else is dysphonetic, abnormal output of energy. Fast forward 1 month of care. You see 12/6/2018, 1/4/2019. This is one of our first kiddos that we got to see, and I have him in here because he started in that state, and I'm going to tell you after we get through this last scan where he's at now. He has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bars of normal functioning after 1 month, right? So from 4 to 9, that's more than 50%, actually more than 100% improvement in normal functioning, right? Fast forward again another month, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Again, another significant leap in normal output of energy. This kiddo is now the starting goalie on his high school soccer team. He was able to travel to Europe unattended by his own parents. So he just had a chaperone, and his mom said, No way when they started care, no way when they were at that point in his childhood would they have ever thought that something like this was possible, because he was so out of control in his own body, and we could measure it and we could monitor it. And most importantly, we could impact it with neurologically focused chiropractic care. I want you to watch this little kiddo. He's 3 years old in this picture, in this video. And one of the most dramatic birth interventions I've ever heard of. Mom was ready to give birth. She showed up at the hospital, dilated to 10 centimeters. They got to the room. She was ready to push, but there was no OB ready for her. And the nurse pushed him back in. He was crowning and she wasn't ready and she panicked. She pushed him back in. And we have records, because we can actually request medical records from hospitals, that he was blue when he was born. His body had a bluish purple tint. And 4 days later, he was still had a hypoxic tone. He still had a lack of oxygenation in his body. They sent him home when he was still blue. He didn't lift his head up for a year. He had significant motor delays. This is him at over 3 years old, not potty trained. You see his left leg completely stuck, rotating in with every step. He can't stabilize himself. Mom has to hold him up in a really rigid fashion. He only had 2 words. They're Spanish speaking. He's saying no, 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 and sí, sí, sí. So yes and no are the only words that he had. He was unable to walk on his own. You see him just leaning against the mom. Fast forward 1 month. Watch his first step with his
Go ahead. Can you walk?
toe immediately rotates out. Boom, steps, walks. He has balance. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But he is
So
1
good.
month out from
Can
his
you go
first
back?
adjustment. That's incredible. He is reconnecting his nervous system. We're reconnecting the movement motor patterns in his brain that have been suppressed since the day he came into this world. These are his scans. So we have the motor scans on top, the SEMG scan, and I don't have any idea why why those white bars are white, because one of them's got a measurement of a 46 and the one above it's red when it's only a 10. So that so much energy stuck in this little dude's body, so much energy output is rigid that you just watch him. May, June, July go from all red to slightly less red to almost all white within 3 months. The bottom scan down here is a thermal scan. Thermal scans measure temperature on the skin, which is your blood flow. So we want the bars to be all short bars, kind of bouncing back and forth. It tells us there's good regulation of thermal energy, regulation of blood flow to the skin. This little guy, if you look at the one under the word May here, it says 4.8. He had almost a 5-degree thermal imbalance at the base of his upper neck, at the base of his skull. What does that mean? He had such a big subluxation pattern. They had 5 degrees difference on the skin temperature of one side versus the other, which means blood flow, which means no wonder he was still dealing with the same blood flow issue that came out of the hospital blue. He was still dealing with the same subluxation pattern since the day he was born. We go to June, it's removed, and there's still some big patterning happening from one side to the other. We go to July, it's starting to rebound really nicely. It's staying really clean. And this little kiddo was thriving. Watch this, 3 months later, 36 adjustments. He was in our office 3 times a week, getting adjusted, getting his nervous system reconnected, getting his brain kind of refiring back up within that great motor system, feeding information forward, and he's actually able to run and coordinate to kick the ball. Just absolutely incredible. That's our little guy there again. Now, I told you I was going to highlight Brooklyn from the very beginning slide that we had. And the reason I want to highlight this is just to go into her scans. Like I said, she was nonverbal. She needed braces to walk. She had so many other challenges, but she had torticollis when she was born. You name it, she had immune challenge issues. She had, major sensory challenges. She was a kiddo that it took us almost a month to even get an initial scan on her because she was so sensory overloaded that you couldn't even come near her. She could sense you even coming behind her to even get close to a scan. So with kiddos like that, when they're so sensory overloaded, they're so nervous and anxious with any situation, oftentimes we'll just have them come in and meet our team. They'll come in and they'll walk through the office every day after work for almost a month. She would come through our office and just say hi. wave and start to realize that she's connecting faces, facial recognition with our team, with our space as a safe space that we can come in and actually be comfortable. We had to find ways to kind of turn down the external noise triggering her fight or flight response so that we could actually get input into her nervous system to change from within. So when we look at her thermal scan, you'll see huge imbalance from left-sided on the upper neck blue right immediately into double reds below that. So big crossed imbalance in thermal regulation in her upper neck. What does that tell us? Subluxation was choking out the neurological signaling going in and out of her brain. The other thing that this tells us, you look right down here at this T8, 9, 10 area where it's green, green, blue, red, or green, green, blue, green, and this clumping kind of pyramid looking area of stress and imbalance, that's right over her adrenal glands. Adrenal glands are what? Stress. They fire stress and cortisol. Her nervous system was so imbalanced that at such a young age that she was actually dealing with adrenal challenges because her nervous system was firing so discoordinated or dysregulated. Fast forward from May to September, completely balanced. She's doing incredible. One green bar, one mild imbalance compared to what she was dealing with before. And she was able to actually start going into her dad's work, which is the restaurant industry, significant stimulation overload, sensory overload, where she never could before. She could go in there and actually see her dad and see her family. She could say, I love you. She was starting to speak. She got rid of her braces and was walking brace free within a matter of weeks of starting care in our office because we were starting to connect that motor system, starting to connect the cerebellar system with the rest of her brain so she could start to coordinate better. I have one more story I want to get to, a little bit older kid, and this little guy, not so little anymore, has such a unique place in my heart because this was a family that came in day one, said, I don't believe what you're saying. I don't think you can help us. I don't believe in chiropractic, but we've done everything. We've tried everything. And I loved that coming from that mom because she was honest and upfront and she wasn't, putting on a front. She said, we've done everything. You are the last hope, but literally, I don't believe in chiropractic. And listen to this. Our 8-year-old Brody has had a very challenging year. His behavior started to take a turn for the worse. His mood was usually horrible. He gained too much weight too fast. He had his adenoids and tonsils removed, and when he did, he had a significant dysregulation of his metabolism, and he gained a ton of weight in a very short period of time. He was angry almost all the time, sometimes physically violent. He was diagnosed with a mood disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and panic attacks. He's seen peds doctors, sleep doctors, psych doctors. We've been to the clinic more times than I can count this year. They put him on mood stabilizers and antipsychotic meds. Nothing was working. Now for the good news, Brody's been seeing Experience Wellness Chiropractic and getting adjusted 2 to 3 times weekly. During this time, we've watched Brody turn back into his old, funny, charming, and happy self. He's been sleeping in his own bed. He's no longer physically violent or angry. I've heard him say things like, I can't believe I don't have a headache, and I feel like I've lost weight. I could go on and will from now on be an advocate for chiropractic care. It honestly changed our lives. All of us were being affected now, and there's a lot less stress for everyone. There will never be enough thanks. The end of that just says it all. You can't have a kiddo on a perfect storm path that doesn't significantly affect the entire family, not just in mood, but in resources and everything. There's so much attention that goes to these kids that are struggling so significantly. And I don't want to say that everyone else suffers because that isn't necessarily suffering, but it's the attention is there because it has to be on these kids. His brother, after Brody here started saying, I don't have a headache anymore, said, I have headaches too. And so then he got started under care, and guess what? His headaches went away like that. But there was so little attention there because Brody needed so much. His needs were so great because he was subluxated so deeply. His nervous system was so dysregulated from a very young age that he needed that system to be turned back on. And I'm so, so happy that we got to work with him. Thank you so much for sticking with me for this first, Perfect Storm workshop. If you've never seen this before. And I want to commend you for number one, that you're already taking this first action step, which is what? Keep asking questions, keep finding answers. You wouldn't be on here if you didn't want to find answers. You wouldn't be on here if you didn't care and you weren't deeply rooted in finding out how to help your kids or someone in your family or even yourself. And so keep asking questions, ask us more questions, respond to this email, respond to this workshop that you're watching, leave us comments somewhere, and send us questions via email because we want to help. The second thing, reduce and remove those 3 T's, right? Start to take inventory of the stress that you might be dealing with. Physical stress, chemical stress, mental emotional stress. Where are the areas in your lives that you're seeing the biggest chunks of stress as input, and start to figure out how we can start to mitigate some of that. And then most importantly, above all else, you need to get your child scanned. We need to find out what's the subluxation pattern deeply rooted in their nervous system, not allowing proper growth and development to happen. What's stuck in their nervous system, shifting into this sympathetic dominant state, that fight or flight dominant state that we need to start to unwind so that they can actually start to heal. And that is the help opportunity that we talked about earlier. We get this question all the time. How long does it take? That really depends. It depends on how deeply subluxated they are and how early it happened. But here's the cool thing. On the bottom here is age, and on the top, the y-axis is the brain's ability to change in response to experiences, right? So it's an inverse relationship. The older you get, the more effort it takes to make changes to the brain. The younger you are, the faster your brain and nervous system makes changes. So what does this mean? At no point on this entire age spectrum is it 0. So there's always hope. There's always changeability within the neurological system. There's always neurological circuits that are being connected, that are creating new synaptic activity. There's always ability to heal. So what does it mean to get scanned? What do they actually measure? Well, I showed you 2 of them already in their workshop. We do surface EMG, we do thermography, and the third scan, which is this little rainbow graph, the red, yellow, green over here and here, that's called heart rate variability. And it actually measures where you sit on that scale of fight or flight and rest and digest. It measures the sympathetic parasympathetic balance that your nervous system actually has at that moment. And the cool thing is it also actually measures the energy systems that you have. So the longer you're stuck in a fight or flight state, the more it diminishes the fuel tank. So we can actually measure all of that, which helps us care plan specifically to the needs of every individual person, kiddo, adult that comes into our office. So what's next? If you know you're watching this, you're like, that's my kiddo. I can't wait to get my child scanned. Well, you need to talk to one of our team members tonight, right? Tomorrow, as soon as you possibly can, reach out to us. We will have opportunities in our office probably as early as tomorrow morning, depending on when you're watching this video, right? We have an incredible team. Like I said, we have a big number of doctors. We have a big number of care advocates because we want to make sure that we can serve at a huge capacity. So don't hesitate. Call us right away. And the coolest thing, we take our new patient fees, we drop them all the way to $47. It's like practically giving it away. And the reason is simple. We never let finances be the barrier to finding out whether or not we can help. So we want to help. We want to find out. And the way that we do that is we set up a 30-minute phone consult first. This is really important, especially when we're dealing with perfect storm kiddos, because I don't like talking about kids in front of them. They've heard for almost their entire lives what their challenges are. Oftentimes it's them being blamed for certain things. Oftentimes it's, teachers and other people saying they're this or they're that. And I don't like those kids getting imprinted consistently on their behaviors. Oftentimes things that they don't really actually feel like they can control. So we get all of that out of the way on the phone beforehand. We go dive deep into the history, fertility history, pregnancy history, labor and delivery, early childhood. No matter where they're at on the perfect storm spectrum, we always go back to square one and we dive deep because we want to build that stress history and really find out what it's going to take to unwind and unroot those patterns that are there. So after that 30-minute phone consult, we set up a full in-office exam where you get a great tour of our practice. We have such an amazing care team that are like your concierge service for these kiddos. They'll get scanned. One of our doctors, whether it's me or one of our doctors, will come in and go through a full exam. We make it super fun. It's almost like games for a lot of the littler kids that we play with, because our number one goal after a day one in our office is that the kids are excited to come back for a second day, that the kids are actually excited and had a lot of fun and liked the people that were here and had an enjoyable experience, because all too often our healthcare experiences are not enjoyable for these kids, and they have white coat syndrome and they have They actually have doctor-based trauma where they've had exams forced, whether it's things shoved in their ears or, down their throat, whatever it is, they're traumatized from their current healthcare system. So you'll notice I'm wearing a t-shirt. Why? Because everything is laid back in our office. It's jeans, it's t-shirts. We have an office puppy that sits behind the front desk for the kids because they just love the experience of feeling like they're at home. So get into our office, make your phone consult, come and get scanned, and then from there we build out a complete report of findings and a customized care plan for exactly what it's going to take to get your kiddo or you out of that storm, out of the not just the symptoms that you're dealing with, but the stuck neurological state you're dealing with, because your symptoms might go away long before that stuck neurological state goes away, that subluxated pattern, which is why we measure it. So thank you. Thank you for being on. Thank you for sticking with us. Whether you're watching this in our app, whether you're seeing this on a landing page, I want you to reach out to us. Let us know what you think. Let us know how we can help you. Let us know how we can get that phone consult so we can get you guys in the office, get scanned, and start back to the road to recovery. So reach out. We can't wait to serve you. Thanks.